We have to identify the appropriate lawful basis that you'll rely upon for the purpose of processing your employee data. To simplify things, if you're brand new to this, I was always told to think of these options as buckets. You have 6 available to you. Each of those buckets represents one lawful basis. If you cannot fit your processing into one of those buckets, it's highly likely it is unlawful, which would indicate a breach of one of the key principles under the UK GDPR, which is that of lawfulness. Just to address a side question, which is one of consent, it tends to come up quite commonly, especially in this context. It's certainly one of the better known lawful basis. However, it's not often an appropriate grounds for processing an employment context. I know, however tempting it can be to rely on the simplicity of asking for consent. It's nice and binary. It's yes, no. It's recordable. It's demonstrable. It can be very difficult to substantiate the absence of coercion when any imbalance of power, such as an employer and employee relationship, exists. Any consent that you rely upon as your lawful basis must be, among other things, freely given. Now, although we may often wish to tell our boss to go and jump whenever they make certain requests of us, in practice, we're highly unlikely to use that choice of words when we inevitably comply with their request. Therefore, any such consent is not given freely or perceived to be given freely whenever you're under an employment context, an employment contract. So, assuming that consent is highly, highly unlikely to be the option that we will rely on, among the other remaining options, the most likely option is to rely upon legitimate interests of the controller, which would be us as the employer. And it's providing that these legitimate interests are not overriding the rights and freedoms to our employees who are data subjects. Now, using legitimate interests as a lawful basis is essentially, to break it down, a balancing act. And the way in which we assess the appropriateness of using legitimate interest is to complete simply a legitimate interest assessment. These are pretty straightforward. They're 3-part tests, and they aim to examine in the whole the legitimacy of your purpose. So what are you undertaking the processing for? In this context, of course, it's the desire to collect and analyze commuting information to fulfill your own sustainability interests and sometimes obligations, but also the provision of benefits to those employees who commute to their workplace. So once we've done that, we secondly tend to look at the necessity of the processing. And that's, I guess, essentially we're asking ourselves the question, is there a substantially less intrusive manner of achieving our purpose by using less data, or a potentially less risky method of processing? When we do this, we're looking to inquire, is this the only way we can achieve our outcome, or could we reduce the risk in some way by limiting things like the scope of the data or how we secure the information, or any other controls that might be available to bring that proportionality balance back? Effectively, that's what we're looking to do, is consider if the process and the purpose is proportional to achieving what we want to do. Finally, when we've got these two set out, we're looking to balance them against potential harms that might befall the individuals, or importantly, of course, if our actions might infringe their rights in any unjustifiable manner. You're likely to be using legitimate interests to process employee data already. Commonly, it'll be things like CCTV, security, web traffic monitoring, holding emergency contact details on behalf of your staff. You're not likely to be asking all of their contacts for consent. That's an example of the same lawful basis, legitimate interests, used in a different but still highly common employment context. You would simply undertake the same assessment and recording and provision of rights as part of your current compliance activities dictate.